Alrighty, good morning everyone. My name is Stacey Joseph. I'm the Business Services Manager at the TCCI. This morning's presentation is brought to you with courtesy of funding from the Australian Government, Department of Employment and Workplace Relations through the Productivity, Education and Training Fund grant program. And we will be covering off wage and super theft. Just ask you to mute yourself if you're not on mute, please. Thank you, that's lovely. Alrighty, so for those of you that joined a little bit later, we are recording this session. So if you want to ask any questions but you don't want to be on the recording, you can ask them at the end. I will let you know when we've stopped recording. Okay, so a bit of an overview. This legislation was part of the Closing Loopholes bill. We're going to have a look at what wage and super theft actually is, what the consequences are, and most importantly, what you can do to make sure that you do not fall foul of the requirements and who is available to help you. Just a quick disclaimer that the advice that we're providing is general in nature. If you would like advice around your specific circumstances, we encourage you to reach out following this workshop. So for those of you that have already joined one or two of these, this is part of the Closing the Loopholes bill, the change to the Fair Work Act, which was passed on the 12th of February 2024. It includes a number of changes that are related to wage compliance to make sure that people are being paid correctly. It also includes regulated labour hire orders, which affects businesses that are using labour hire in their organisation for roles that you have people employed directly to perform, as well as new wage theft offences for employers who intentionally fail to pay wages and or superannuation when it's due. So the wage and super theft offence commenced on the 1st of January this year. And it means that there will be a criminal liability for any intentional underpayments. So not accidental underpayments or inadvertent or genuine mistakes. It's where there is evidence to suggest that an employer was aware that they were not paying somebody correctly, either their wages or superannuation, and continued to not pay them correctly after they became aware of that. So it has to meet the criminal standard of being beyond reasonable doubt, that there is proof beyond reasonable doubt that the employer intended for their conduct to result in the non-payment of an employee's minimum statutory entitlements under the Fair Work Act, Modern Award or Enterprise Agreement. So intentional, what does intentional mean? The answer isn't found in Amendment Act or the Fair Work Act. It comes from existing federal criminal law. Which is effectively that something is done on purpose, deliberately and done consciously. And importantly, for a company, that they can be found to have engaged in intentional conduct if the company expressly authorises the commission of the conduct or tacitly authorises or impliedly authorises it. So effectively, if a company is condoning intentional underpayment of employees, they may find themselves in some very hot water. So if an employer mistakenly misclassifies an employee under the Modern Award or makes an inadvertent payroll error, they are not guilty of an offence, even though that misclassification or error might have resulted in the employee receiving less than they ought to. On the other hand, if an employer deliberately misclassified an employee so that they could pay them at a lower rate, it would be an offence under the bill. So the legislation refers to an employer failing to pay a required amount under the Act or a Fair Work instrument, which results in an intentional failure to pay the required amount to the employee in full, on or before the day when the required amount is due for payment. So that includes wages and superannuation, except for a very small group of exempt situations. So there is an exemption for businesses through the Voluntary Small Business Wage Compliance Code, and it's where a small business can demonstrate that they have attempted to comply with that wage compliance code. They are exempt from this legislation. That code is available just by Googling that. So if you search Small Business Wage Compliance Code, it will take you to the Fair Work website and provide that information. And just to reiterate, although I would assume most people on this call would know, a small business under the Fair Work Act is a business that has less than 15 employees, and that is by head count, not by FTE. So there are significant increases to penalties. Civil penalties will be increasing 5 times to 93,900, and for serious contraventions, 939,000. Maximum penalties for most contraventions have increased by about 500%. Companies can face a basic penalty of almost $1 million for a single contravention, and serious contraventions could be up to $4.6 or $4.7 million. It only applies to corporations that are not small business employers. So whilst the legislation didn't take effect until this year, any business that's found to have been underpaying will be going back to the 27th of February last year for back pay. So the important thing really here is to make sure that we are hyper-vigilant when it comes to our wage and superannuation compliance. So if you're aware or you're unsure about any particular employee or group of employees' pay or superannuation entitlements, it's really important to double check that and get that fixed as soon as you possibly can. And there are a range of tools available to do that. You can go onto the Fair Work Act. There's a great, the PACT calculator is very useful for doing that. You need to make sure that you're actually keeping accurate records of employee hours. I would recommend doing this for all employees, salary or employees being paid by the hour, so that you can demonstrate that employees are either being paid at award conditions or they meet the Better Off Overall test, the boot. Understand your obligations in relation to eligibility, the amount and timing of superannuation contributions. So an area that we've had a few employers caught out on lately is independent contractors, and that those independent contractors in many cases are entitled to superannuation payments. And those payments need to be made based on the invoiced amount. So you can't package up their superannuation into what you're paying them through the invoice. There is an expectation that the employer or the business would be paying super in addition to the independent contractor's invoice fee. Now, I'm going to give you, if you're sitting there going, well, but what about this? I'm going to say this is Australian tax office legislation. This information is very much general in nature, and if you are not sure whether or not your contractors are entitled to superannuation, I will strongly encourage you to either have a look on the ATO, give the ATO a call, or talk to your accountant, as they should be across who is entitled to superannuation and at what rate. There's been a number of changes over the last few years in terms of who is entitled to super, and we have seen some old employment contracts referring to 9.5% super, or employees that don't earn a certain amount of money not being paid super. All of those things have changed. And I find the ATO website is a really useful place to find that information, although there are still a number of grey areas. So that's where you can either talk to the ATO or give your accountant a call. If you haven't done so in recent history, I would suggest undertaking a payroll audit, and we'll talk a little bit about what that might look like in a minute. And also review the use of your contractors to make sure they are in fact genuine independent contractors and they shouldn't actually be classified as employees. We have another session coming up in a couple of weeks. So there's a series of these online webinars every Monday at 10 o'clock. We are recording them. So if you are unable to attend but you're interested in the topic, if you register to attend the webinar, we will email you a link with the recording and any resources to go along with that session. So a payroll audit, the word audit, I don't know about everybody on this call, but it certainly strikes fear in my heart because it requires a lot of attention to detail and probably line by line review of your payroll practices. So something that we've found, well, it's been an ongoing issue, but it seems to be even more frequent lately, is people have been classified under the wrong award. If you're not sure what award applies to your employees or your particular business, I strongly recommend not just defaulting to the miscellaneous award. Some positions are award free and other positions we will find a more appropriate award than the miscellaneous award. It's not that I don't know what to classify this employee as, so I'm going to put them under the miscellaneous award. I've also had businesses paying under awards like the on-site general construction award when that's not the award that applies to them. So you might even find yourself with some better conditions if you have been paying under the incorrect award. So it's a great time to have a chat with somebody that you trust, or jump onto the Fair Work website to make sure that you are in fact paying under the correct award. At the start of every modern award is some fairly prescriptive information about who that award applies to. And if you're looking at your award and you can't see the roles and you don't think you fit under them, then there's a chance that you might not be paying under the correct award. So once we've established that we're paying under the correct award, or if you've got an enterprise agreement, then happy days. Making sure that we're actually correctly classifying people. There's been a number of underpayment claims where people have been incorrectly classified. That's not always a deliberate thing. Sometimes we bring somebody into our organisation performing certain tasks, and over time people tend to take on additional duties or responsibilities. If we're not checking that against the award, we may in fact be underpaying somebody because they've moved up a classification. There are other awards, like the SHADS award, where there are automatic pay increases based on the amount of time that somebody has been in the role and whether or not they've had a performance review and a whole bunch of other stuff. But if you have a look within the award, there's usually some very detailed information about the roles and responsibilities for each level of classification. So it's a really good opportunity to have a look at what people are doing in your business and make sure their job hasn't morphed into something that actually leads to them being entitled to a higher classification or additional allowances as part of their remuneration. Which feeds nicely into the next point, is actually checking what allowances would apply to people within their job roles. Again, the PACT calculator on the Fair Work website is a really good tool for that. It will often pick up any allowances that somebody performing a job like that would be entitled to, and then you can actually decide whether or not that is applicable or not applicable. And also, if you're paying people under a salary, to make sure that that salary is in fact making that employee better off overall than what they would be if they were under hourly rates, which is why timesheets are really important, so that we can do a bit of a quick analysis and say, okay, this person's worked this many hours over the last month. This is what they would have got paid if they were paid under the award, factoring in penalty rates and allowances and any overtime, and then actually looking at what that person took home for that period to make sure that they are in fact better off overall. The other thing that you might have is that you might be paying a loaded hourly rate. So you're paying them above the award rate. And if you've got a good employment contract, you will have a clause in there that says that that loaded hourly rate is compensating them for all other legal entitlements, such as allowances, overtime, penalty rates. It's also important to check those pay rates to make sure that you haven't fallen behind. If you've had wage increases, so minimum wage increases, that can mean that sometimes when we think we're paying well over and above the award, when we actually have a look 18 months or 2 years after, we may in fact actually be at the award or below it. And we have had to help a few employers that have discovered that when they've undertaken a payroll audit, that they had in fact sort of fallen behind, even though, 12 months, 2 years ago, they were well above the award rate. Reviewing timesheets. Timesheets are legal documents, so making sure that timesheets are completed accurately. I definitely wouldn't want to be standing in front of the Fair Work Commission if, we have a practice of doctoring our timesheets to make sure that we are within the legal requirements for the hours worked and, penalty rates and overtime rates, etc. So have a look and make sure timesheets are being completed in a timely and accurate manner. I know there's a lot of businesses that really struggle to chase timesheets from people. I've said a few times, if you haven't got a timesheet, it's very difficult to pay someone. And if you want to incentivise people to complete a timesheet, then getting paid late is often a very good motivator. And also make sure that you have a review of your superannuation payments to make sure that you're meeting the requirements under the Australian Tax Office for them. So there's been some high profile cases. Everybody probably remembers this one. This was a few years ago. The reason I wanted to share some of these is if big business and people that have lots of resources and probably a HR department, it's a cast of thousands, still can't get this stuff right. It proves how difficult and challenging this can actually be, particularly if you don't have a lot of resources to dedicate to making sure that we are actually meeting all of our wage and superannuation payment requirements. So that was a very high profile case, which I don't think did George's reputation any good. And we certainly don't want to be all over the news for underpaying our staff. A more recent one, an operator of 2 Tasmanian petrol stations was fined nearly $180,000 for underpaying 4 migrant workers. Generally speaking, whether or not somebody is an Australian citizen or not shouldn't affect what we pay them. If they don't have an Australian tax file number, it will affect the amount of pay that PAYG or tax that you withhold. However, somebody's citizenship status does not change the fact that they need to be paid appropriate award rates. So not a great publicity stunt for that organisation. And it's worth noting that the Fair Work Ombudsman will target particular industry sectors or regions in Tasmania. Sometimes this is a really random thing. Other times it will be based on the type of calls that they've been receiving from either employees or the general public. So people can call Fair Work and, maybe they've observed that somebody's always at work, or they've, had an issue with an underpayment, and Fair Work will target particular sectors. So last year they targeted the agriculture sector, and they dropped in on a whole bunch of agricultural businesses to make sure that their pickers, so their seasonal workers, were being paid appropriately, and undertook a payroll audit to make sure they were being paid. The awful thing about being audited by Fair Work is that process can take a long time. We had a business that was requested to provide all of their payroll records and didn't hear anything back for about 6 months. And then when they finally heard back, they found out that they had an underpayment in excess of $250,000, and that was a small not-for-profit. So that underpayment actually meant that not-for-profit was no longer able to trade, which was very, very disappointing. And that underpayment was not a deliberate underpayment. That was actually a misclassification of award, and then a misclassification of the staff members and the roles that they were performing under that award, and it was all unintentional. But the fact of the matter is, if we underpay people, we need to rectify that. So I did say at the beginning this would be a fairly short one, but I am more than happy to take any questions at the end. So the things that I would be thinking about after this workshop are you confident that your salaried employees would meet the Better Off Overall test, or the BOOT, that you have accurate timesheets for all employees, that employees are being paid under the correct award, that they're being classified correctly, and that they are being paid all of the allowances that they would be entitled to. I'll be having a look at any independent contractors that you're using in your organisation and make sure that they meet the test and they're not in fact employees. As I said, we'll have another session on that in a couple of weeks' time. So if that's something that's of particular interest to you, jump online for that one. Making sure that your employees are receiving appropriate penalties and allowances based on their job role and responsibilities, and that you are meeting all of the Australian Tax Office requirements in relation to payment of superannuation. So there's a number of organisations that can help you. As I said, the Australian Tax Office is absolutely your best source of information for superannuation payments, or your accountant. If you are looking for advice around awards, classifications and remuneration, I strongly advise that you either approach, if your industry association offers this service, I would go to them first, because they will be specialists in your particular modern awards. The Fair Work Ombudsman can be quite helpful. Probably the pay calculator is more useful for wage rates. The TCCI provides workplace relations advice. We have a helpline that can help you identify whether or not you are paying under the right award, right classification, right allowances, and whether or not you've got your salaried employees set up correctly. If you have 19 or less full-time equivalent employees, Then we also have some funding through the Employer of Choice Assist program, which can work with you to do a little bit of an audit on your current payroll setup and making sure that all of your employees are in fact being paid correctly. And I'm going to say something a little bit cheeky here, so apologies if I do offend anybody. We've had to fix a few underpayments where people have taken workplace relations advice from organisations that are not specialists in workplace relations or the Fair Work Act or modern awards. So I strongly advise that whatever source you get your rates of pay and all of the other information about modern award or minimum employee entitlements is that organisation specialises in providing that advice, and they have insurance in the event that you get incorrect advice and you do in fact get an underpayment, because if they have given you the wrong advice and they're insured to provide that advice, then they can actually be approached to compensate you for giving you incorrect advice. So there's no questions in the chat, so that is good. For those of you that have been on these sessions before, as this is a federally funded workshop, we do have to provide feedback back to the government to confirm that we have in fact delivered what we said we were going to deliver, and that hopefully it has given you some information that is useful to you. We will also send a survey link around if you're not a fan of the QR code. So I'm just going to stop recording now to see if we have any questions.